We have scheduled this event with Mr. Raguž and Mr. Joseph before the floods rain havoc in the region. That is why I have asked our speakers to adjust their presentation and address this natural disaster and its effects on the political situation in the region. Much of what was rebuilt in the last 15 years is ruined, livestock killed, human lives taken. The pictures we've seen were devastating, but what surprised many of us was the solidarity that emerged from this disaster. So this is my introduction, and you've seen also in our invitation what was the original topic. So now I'd like to introduce Mr. Martin Raguž, who some of you may know. He's been involved in Bosnian politics for well over 20 years. I met him in Mostar in 1994, just after the federation was formed. At that time, he was in charge of refugees and displaced persons. He was one of the founders of the liberally oriented Alliance of Socialist Youth of Bosnia and Herzegovina. When 1992-95 a war broke out, he was appointed Minister for Refugees and Social Policy in the government of Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he spent 2 years in the besieged city of Sarajevo. He left Sarajevo when the conflict between Bosniaks and Croats started in 1993, and he joined HDZ at that point. He left HDZ in 2006 and joined HDZ 1990, whose president he's been since 2013. Among other things, he received World Humanist League gave him a golden plaque for the culture of political dialogue. That is the highest level, actually, they give to any citizen. And he also, European movement gave him a reward awarded him as the most European citizen of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This all tells us that he is oriented toward Europe, and I would like to give a floor to Mr. Raguž. So, you want to press that speak? Okay. Okay, he'll start with English and then he will switch. So if you need translations, please use your headset.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to express my gratitude to the US Institute of Peace, who invited me for the second time, and for this opportunity to hold this lecture as member of the State Parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the president of HDZ 1990. After the short introduction, I am at your disposal, ready to answer all of your questions. Special gratitude to Ms. Renata Stubner, who organized this event, and to the BiH Embassy, especially to Ambassador Jadranka Negodić. I will kindly ask Mr. Janković to translate my lecture so that I have the opportunity to fully express myself. Thank you very much. Hvala svima koji ste danas došli u ovakvom broju.
Thank you to you all for showing up in such a big number. For the invitation of the Institute of Peace, we arrived yesterday. Actually, we had to be yesterday in Washington, but the storm moved us to Charlotte. But successfully, we arrived today here to have this lecture. And the storm yesterday above Washington put us back to Bosnia and Herzegovina and the whole region, Serbia and Croatia. Region in which these days there's a biblical catastrophe happening. These floods, most likely never recorded in history, first took a lot of human lives, few tens of people in Bosnia and Herzegovina and especially Serbia, and caused huge material and human costs, which effects we will have to resign in the long term. And this situation, which Ms. Stubna mentioned in the beginning, remembered ourselves all in the region that we have to be different when there's a question of organizing public affairs and the public relationship with different countries and the relationship toward the people inside of the country. That's one of the key messages I want to greet you all. Unfortunately, the space of Western Balkans and Southeast Europe through history has been through few cycluses left apart with confrontations from outside, ones from inside, and the citizens of the countries have paid for all of these. And after all of these war cataclysms that were happening, we are witnessing what happened 20 years ago, only in Bosnia and Herzegovina. More than 50% of the citizens have to leave their homes. More than 100,000 people were killed. And this is one cataclysm which is not remembered since the Second World War and in the new European history. And then, first we had Washington's agreement, and this is the reason why I want to use my political approach with two really important agreements which happened in the United States of America. And these are my key messages I want to send. The question is, would there be peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region if the United States didn't affect it and helped providing peace in this region? Now, 20 years after Washington Agreement, which was in front of the Dayton Peace Agreement, and which was creating the Croatian-Bosnian Federation in this context, on 51% of the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and later, 1 year later, through the Dayton Peace Agreement, most likely one of the most complex peace agreements through the history, and the second part of Bosnia and Herzegovina under the name of Republika Srpska, on 49% of the territory, was incorporated in Bosnia and Herzegovina on a way that Bosnia and Herzegovina has an international continuity towards these agreements. Bosnia and Herzegovina, as a complex country, a country of three nations, Bosniaks, Croatians, and Serbian, which is defined in this statement of law, is organized through two entities, symmetric entities. And this complexity of the country is without precedent through the history in the world. It's organized in such a manner that until the day, with a high impact of the international organization, couldn't solve the complexity of the issues. And at least the Annex 10 of the peace agreement gave the obligation to the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina to watch over the peace agreement. And afterwards, this mandate was put forward that he by himself, the High Representative, can choose which laws have to be change the politicians and the officials, and effect on the institutions inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And sometimes this mandate for the High Representative was used in that manner. Now the situation is totally different. The key message from the international community is that we have to take the responsibility for the situation in the country, which is a logical message. When we would have a logical system inside of the country. But this message doesn't work in this kind of system, which is too complex and too complicated. And this is one of the key messages I want to send today. Because you cannot expect for the main players in the political point of view, which represents three different options coming from diametric different constitutional and factual positions, expect a rational agreement. Without the partnership of the international community, and today I'm asking that the focus should be put back on Bosnia and Herzegovina, so that the whole huge engagement which the United States has and Europe and even wider wouldn't be lost. Because the political situation since Dayton till today is the biggest institutional and political problems we are facing and crisis, and it's showing obviously 2 points. First, that the key local players don't have this kind of political capacity to find an agreement and put Bosnia and Herzegovina on a European way and a way towards NATO. This is one of the key points we are representing as a political party, which I represent as a parliamentarian in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because now, after Europe hugs Bosnia and Herzegovina, coming directly to the borders of Bosnia and Herzegovina, after the membership of Croatia inside of the European Union, and after the agreement between Pristina and Belgrade, there are new strategic conditions that Bosnia and Herzegovina could move forward and not stagnate, keep the status quo, or continue this agony which is currently happening. That's why we all have the obligations that we have to change this situation and that we push these ships towards stability. And the third message which I want to say at the beginning, it's time for a new political generation inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which can harmonize identities inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, won't confront them. Because the problem of Bosnia and Herzegovina is not the national identities or cultures or religious identity, but manipulations through this process. And once and for all, this has to stop. First, we have to appreciate each other and represent the entities in the full level. And then these identities have to come with balance with individual and human rights inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a form that Bosnia and Herzegovina will truly become a European country. If we don't have this kind of approach, the process of political and any other instability will continue outside of these instruments of the European Union and NATO. And I don't want to call such negative energy or send some negative messages, because by nature I'm optimistic, and I believe that Bosnia and Herzegovina has the legitimate right on their legitimate constitution moving forward towards European, and that this will be realized. But the question is, when will we have the consensus of 3 nations and the key institutions of Bosnia and Herzegovina? I wouldn't like that we have a scenario which is currently happening in Ukraine. And the fourth point I want to point out, these lectures which we can see from the history, prevention in 1991 and 1992, when Europe was stepping back, was lacking behind, needs to be as a true election that we cannot allow not intervene in time and solve these issues that are currently happening. But without the United States of America, with all of the respect towards Europe, and without a truly partnership between them, I don't really see a way out. And it's not really happening anything. So all of you who are here today, I see you all as friends of Bosnia and Herzegovina and their citizens and all of the nations inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I want to express my gratitude, and I believe you will do anything possible in your power so that we change a positive focus on Bosnia and Herzegovina to move forward with these priorities. But we, inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, have to start from ourselves. And to shorten this introduction, we have to follow a Cartesian, and identity Cartesian, and entity Cartesian, and national Cartesian. That we have to understand that there's not the fault in somebody else, but in us. That we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, which is our responsibility to solve these issues that are currently happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina through few cycles of history, and which is creating this huge human sacrifice and material problems. And these catharsis, from my point of view, has started in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The way how I see this catharsis is really important that I'm sharing it with you. That the social rights few months shown how the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina is really hard, especially when you see it from the perspective of citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This kind of scenario is frozen, but it's not solved. How they want to solve this situation, and when this situation will erupt to an even bigger problem, is a special question which would need a special elaboration. Now, these natural catastrophes showed that all of the nations have a much bigger feeling of solidarity towards each other than the politician, and this is one of the most important messages which it was submitted, not only to the politician but to the whole region. There were no borders, everybody was supporting each other, government was working together, and people without the influence of politicians were trying to support each other and helping in any means necessary. So this is a message that we can work together, we can live together, but we are lacking this leadership who would put forward this strategic moment which is currently happened, and who would push us towards a positive perspective in the 21st century inside of the European Union and the NATO. To conclude with the elections which will happen this October, general election in October this year, under these current analytics after these floods, more than 60% of the people, of the voters, doesn't know whom to vote for. Meaning there's the space for a new approach, for a positive, responsible approach, and not preserving status quo, which unfortunately most of the key players want to keep status quo because they have the monopoly and the power to control the processes, which unfortunately on this way have negative implications on the country. And this is what I claim responsibility in front of you. We have to redefine the political confederation inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina on a way that the governments or parliamentary majorities, first time after Dayton, try to form a government on mutual programs and politics, and not on political positions and taking a part of the big cake of public resources. Because we have to stop to throw the ball on the responsibility to say some other is responsibility. Sarajevo is responsible for this situation, or Banja Luka is responsible for this situation. We have to move through this positive approach. Because I'm coming from the Croatian national political circle. Very often they're trying to make a spin that the Croatians are the problems inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I want to say loudly and clear, and on this program I was elected as a president of the political party. Such divided Bosnia and Herzegovina between Sarajevo and Banja Luka, where they're moving apart from each other, unfortunately, the Croatians have the key role to solve this problem and to start pushing them together to stabilize the whole country and to move forward for European Bosnia and Herzegovina. especially now after Croatia joining the European Union, and to change this negative path. And they will be trying responsibility in somebody else and taking the responsibility, and in this way, in this manner, to get equality inside of the nation and inside of the countries, between all of the nations. And now, to finish, why did we having a stagnation inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina? Why we don't have the agreement about the European Court ruling Sedis Finti? And the ruling is that the imperative that all citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, without claiming that he's Croatian, Bosnian, or Serbian, has the full rights. And we have to find a solution how to bring this individual rights inside of our law. And I named this the Europeanization of Dayton, to bring these values, these European values, inside of the Dayton Agreement. Not changing the Dayton Agreement in such a big manner, just putting these European criteria of individual rights and national rights inside of the Constitution, so that we would move away from this negative economical situation, could try to handle these problems which really affect the lives of the people. Hopefully I didn't go too wide apart with my presentation.
Actually, we've heard a lot of interesting theses, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss, and you'll be able to ask questions. I've seen you've been taking notes, but before we come to questions and answers part, I'd like to introduce Ed Joseph. He's a famous, highly experienced Balkan expert and lecturer on conflict, stabilization, and reconstruction. He's worked in the Balkans since '92. He's worked in Bosnia, in Kosovo, Macedonia. He worked in Bosnia, he worked in Brčko, in Sarajevo, in Mostar, all over the place. And most recently, he was deputy head of the OSCE mission in Kosovo. He led the technical team of OSCE negotiators and forged an 11th-hour breakthrough to run Serbian elections in Kosovo, averting a brewing crisis between Serbia and Kosovo. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton specifically acknowledged his contribution. I have printed his latest piece. He's a widely published author, but his latest piece in New York Times was published. It's an op-ed he wrote together with Srećko Latal from the region, and it's called Bosnia's Other Calamity. There were a lot of discussions, comments, some positive, some negative, but if you haven't read it, I suggest you take it, and I'm sure there'll be some questions about that. So, Ed Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
I also wanted to say he's fluent in Croatian, Bosnian, and Serbian.
Nebi rekao. Renata, thank you for the very nice introduction and for inviting me here. It's an honor to be on the panel here with Martin. And I was just telling Martin Raguž that I think the message that he brought is tremendously important, and it's hard for me to agree more with what he said. I have a few remarks, but I'm just going to underscore just a few things that I took away as some key takeaways. Renata, you mentioned the New York Times piece that's over there. In it, we made the point in that piece that Martin just made, but he made it in, I think, a much better way, which is that he talked about this change in the system about when they went for ownership, which is logical, and you put it very well, Martin. Of course it's logical. It's the country is Bosnians, belongs to the Croats, Bosniaks, Serbs, and others to run. Why should internationals be doing it? But you put it very well that that's a logical question, but not when you don't have a logical system. And in that way, you very concisely got to the essence of the problem. And Bosnia is trapped in a system that was a war-ending vehicle. It's been said many times. We don't need to repeat it, go over it. One of the more colorful phrases, one of the former high representatives used this phrase, Bosnia is a prisoner of Dayton. And I know some here may salute Dayton and, oh, it's wonderful and so forth, but it's clearly not. The country is, there's simply no way to deny, I don't know any credible way to deny that the country is in a very serious state, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. It was interesting, your point about the elections. With 60%, you indicated 60% undecided, so hey, here's an opportunity, maybe. You highlighted again something that I think everyone would agree with. Bill Stubner is here. I know he would agree with that the elites in the country are totally all about the status quo. And so potentially we have we might see some opportunity, especially with these devastating floods, that there might be finally some change in the electorate to really consider some alternatives. And at the end, you alluded to, and maybe we'll hear more about it later, about the Croat position in the country and the role that Croats can play in that distance. And I can tell you on this, Renata, you alluded to some of my different positions. Among them was I was in Mostar and Brčko, which was a very nice contrast to go from one to the other. And I thought the Croats in Posavina played a very important role in bridging the gap that was there and taking away some of the suspicion about why people wanted to come home. And it wasn't all about a dark plan to divide Republika Srpska and so forth, but people genuinely wanted to live there. The Croats there saw Bosnia as their country, and they had been displaced from their homes, and they wanted to go back. And we saw some very positive role played by the Croat community there in what would otherwise have been a very, very much more difficult situation without that. So with those brief reactions to your, again, quite compelling piece, let me share a few remarks. And I'm going to begin with using the word that you used to describe these floods, which is biblical. And I have 3 points that I'm going to make here, and just hopefully keep this short, and then we can have a good discussion. But the first point is I want to elaborate on the point about the biblical dimension and use that really as a theme to talk about this, because the first is to try to convey the staggering devastation of these floods in a small country. And that first I have some indicators for you, and the information that I have, it's really, really staggering. So first, when the term biblical that Martin used is tossed around, it's not just a loose metaphor. It's accurately describes. Secondly, if we take that metaphor, of course, the biblical flood, Noah, and of course the movie that's out, the Russell Crowe movie that's out, and people reflect a little bit on why the biblical story. I'm about the last person to come to for some insight into this, but it's still a useful metaphor, because the rain that came, those 40 days and 40 nights, it was punishment, and it was punishment for, in the biblical terms, wickedness. And I'm going to highlight some of the wickedness, not that anyone deserved this, but in the sense that it wasn't rain that created this devastation in Bosnia. It was it was ineptitude and the lack of functioning and the neglect that's been tolerated for so long. It wasn't in the end really an act of God, but it's really been an act of man. And and then finally, to conclude the biblical term, the redemption. The whole point of the flood, of Noah and the flood and so forth, wasn't to destroy the world. It was to start over and have something better. and learn from the mistakes of the past and build. So what are the possibilities for redemption? So those are my 3 points. Let me try to go over them quickly. The extent of the devastation. There will be, some of you may know, there'll be a damage assessment that's meant to be done by the 18th of June, the World Bank, the EU, and the IMF. So they're out there. But the indicators that I've been shared are just incredible. Half the economic output is potentially lost. And again, this is a poor country. There isn't a whole lot to fall back on. A lot of the agriculture may be ruined. And tax receipts, I'm told already for this month, which is coming to a close, are half what they should be. And the damage already exceeds the budgets for both entities. And the context, so it's, and the other point here is that you total all these together, hundreds of thousands of people could be in need. That's what I'm told. Hundreds of thousands of people could be in need. So this is really, really a hugely significant event. The RS, you know, in past, the thing, let's be open and candid here, a lot of the political posturing has been, oh, look at this, the Federation that's all messed up, we're doing fine in the RS. Well, it's the RS that's been particularly badly hit, and there are open political disputes within the RS, and there's open criticism. So this isn't internationals criticizing Dodik, and it's not Bosniaks and Croats, it's other Serbs criticizing the leadership in a very open and sharp way, an accusation of politicization of the aid effort, particularly in Bijeljina, one of the hardest hit areas. So the damage is quite spread around. No one is, there are some, of course, some areas that are thankfully free, but no entity, neither entity is free. And then finally, I would point out in another metaphor of the past, this problem of the mines having been dislodged. I've seen a statistic here that there were, in the country, there were mapped and known areas, 1,200 square miles of mines. And the estimate is that of those 1,200 square miles of mines, some 800 square miles have been affected by either the flooding or the mudslides and dislodged. And here, again, you have quite a graphic metaphor. What is it? That just beneath the surface of the calm are the remnants of the unfinished remnants of the war, the unfinished business of the war, still unaddressed, and I think something to consider about both in terms of its actual threat that it poses to people. There have been 7 explosions already. No one, thankfully, has been hurt, but the danger is quite there, and we can also think about it in the larger reminder of the stunted progress from the war. The other points I think to emphasize is who's going to be most vulnerable in here. A lot of our minds should be with those, the poorest, and also, so I'm informed, a lot of the most vulnerable are those who were themselves refugees. So Serbs who had lived in Croatia and left, and others who've been displaced and living in communities that were not originally their homes. They're already and have been in a more adverse financial position, and this only exacerbates that. So that is really no exaggeration about the extent of this. This is really a devastating event. Then the second point is, why was it so devastating? This was, again, not just the act of God and heavy rains. There had been flooding in the past. There had been flooding in 2010. And the question comes, why weren't the necessary preparations done to address this? We saw very serious questions about the ineptitude in the response, lack of engagement It's on there. My writing partner in the piece, Srečko Latal, who Renata mentioned, he's cited and tracked when the first mentions were on the websites of the entities, and they are well into the disaster before the emergency was even mentioned. The citizens who were in bad need complained that they got virtually no response, and this is in a country where you have layers and layers and layers of administration. So where were the layers? Where were all those folks there who might have been deployed to help? Even there was ineptitude within the media, where the two of the leading networks, rather than broadcast emergency information, had focused on other things, music and an investment conference. It was just incredible that this would have happened. As I mentioned, there was politicization. There's been blatant electioneering in both entities. You had a meeting there where Milorad Dodik went to Belgrade and met with Prime Minister Vučić, rather than keep the focus on the people and, God forbid, make a gesture to the fact that everyone in the country, we are all together united. It was exactly the opposite. It was again another highly divisive message that he gave. In the Federation, you had a minister and an ex-minister trade accusations that were, whatever basis there were to them, were not really the kind of thing that you need in the midst of a crisis to deal with. And there are already reports, and here's where it becomes quite significant. We're not just talking about the past, but in terms of dealing with this relief, there are already reports of corruption in the with respect to the relief effort. These are published reports about this, and fears that people jockeying in order to get kickbacks for the anticipated contracts to come for the cleanup. And that, in and of itself, is going to be a complicating factor in the relief. And having done worked in the relief effort, this is not good, and it is not healthy. Ideally, what you want to do is channel the effort through state institutions in a way to strengthen them. But if they are not reliable and corrupt, well, then you're going to have to find other means. Then my last point. Okay, what about redemption here? What kinds of opportunities do we see for redemption? Here's where there is some good news. The good news is that the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina showed their genuine and true hearts. Martin underscored this as well when he pointed out that the divisions, the system, and the political leaders who benefit from the status quo who create the division. But there were terrific examples of selflessness, utter lack of concern as to the ethnicity of who it was who was in need. There were, to give some examples, from Bihać, where they have, the Una River, and there are a lot of people raft and are quite accomplished, going into the RS in areas that were flooded and helping people out there. There were same going in the other direction, students from Sarajevo University who were also going into Doboj and other places to help. Who cared if they were Serbs or Bosniaks or Croats? Nobody cared, just to try to help. And you had, in one case in Teshan, there was a businessman who had owned some of the gas stations, who provided fuel to those who were in need, again, regardless, without any regard to ethnicity. So, and in addition, you have the examples of the athletes, of course, Novak Djokovic and Edin Dzeko, who both contributed, again, in a way that was just purely humane, and it was without a political basis. The country's football team, which has qualified for the World Cup, and we can only hope that they do like the Japanese women team did after the earthquake in Japan. Now let's hope, come on, we can hope here. They have had benefits already and shown their own generosity of spirit to really help the people of the country. So that's you have a basis there. And so it isn't all just gloom, but the challenges are enormous. And I'm going to close here. We don't have to get into the details right now. There's plenty of time to do that, and there's plenty of brain power here to make suggestions of what to do. But here's really the crucial point, is this is the crisis opportunity that cannot be missed. This one cannot be missed. There's been so many in the past, and there's been so much, talk, and it doesn't work, and so on, and the huffing and puffing. And the protests in February, which many of us thought finally they'll get it together, and the international community will work with folks, work with civil society, and get a serious initiative together. And of course, Germany, others, they're not interested, strategic patience, and so forth. This is the one that must not be missed. All the conditions are there for a very serious initiative. The country is vulnerable. Financial assistance it's only the international community that can come up with the needed financial assistance, leaving aside one other potential source. And so along with that, now is the time for the elections to have a serious transatlantic effort, make the EU process work, work on privatization, root out the corruption, bring in civil society into the conversation, and finally put Bosnia on its correct path, as Martin was suggesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. I just want to ask you a question. Was that a message to the Bosnians, or that was a message to Americans? The last message, the last call for help.
Martin, I believe, is coming here on a mission to wake up folks in this town. We're here in the U.S., and I think, look, it's appropriate today. The president spoke on foreign policy. This, unlike Syria, unlike Ukraine, and so forth, this is a problem that can be resolved and doesn't have any of these downside risks. Engagement in Bosnia, we don't have jihadists. We don't have all of these, we don't have Russia directly engaged where, oh my God, in Ukraine, if we do this, we do that, then it's only, our engagement can almost only be positive. There's almost none of the negative risk factors that you have in Syria and all these other places where we've talked ourselves out of acting. And so I'm reinforcing Martin's message that yes, and Martin made a very strong message about U.S. leadership. It's the fact. He's absolutely right. And you have only one country now that's the would-be, it's the most powerful country in Europe, but it has completely, I think, you can use the word completely, abdicated its leadership role, Germany. They're not equipped to lead. They're powerful, but they have no capacity to lead. No one else is going to step forward in Europe to do that. By default, you come back to the U.S., which doesn't need to do it all, but it needs to be the leading catalyst to get action. That's my
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. So before I open the floor for you for questions, I would like to ask, actually, Martin, what I read in the papers is, I mean, it was, whatever you read, you can always wonder whether it's true or not, but the fact that the Federation, no Bosnia and Herzegovina, ever declared emergency, I read that the reason was because the budget, was actually the emergency budget was empty. The money was used to pay off some government debts. Is that the case? So we'll need to use the interpreter again.
Unfortunately, this is the situation. You're right. And at the beginning, I would like to say one sentence. Mr. Edward really structured. It's obvious that he has been for a long time there, and he detected a really big problem inside of the Federation. the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, according to the Washington Agreement, was expected to be the leader and an example how we should construct the whole country of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Unfortunately, through the political relationship, the Federation became a black hole. From political reasons and from financial reasons. In this current situation, we don't have an agreement with IMF. 40% of the budget is on the line. And plus this, what Edward has mentioned, they cut the income of taxes in half because of these natural disasters. And this is now a framework in which the politics needs to respond, to give an answer. Unfortunately, even in better situation, we didn't get a positive response from politics. We need a structural reform coming from the Federation. This is one thing I wanted to point out at the beginning. So that 60% of the budget is not spent on government and government costs. We have 10 cantons in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have somewhere around 200 ministers in these cantons, somewhere around 400 parliamentarians, and we have public spending which not even Japan could take, or countries which were much stronger. The reform of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina is an imperative. I'm not saying it only because of political reason, but also because of political reason. This is one process which would bring back the faith that through a dialogue, through a political dialogue, we can find strategic solutions for the benefit of the people living there. Because now we have the fact that none of these cantons expect Sarajevo canton just because it's in the position, because it's in the center of power with all of the international community and the financial institutions. Not even there can pay all of the bills they have according to the obligations. So we're losing this sense of this kind of organization inside of the country. We have to move forward to rationalize the number of the cantons so that they are self-sustainable. And these are a few of the key points we have to put forward. In forehand, Federation was giving a positive message to the whole country, but Republika Srpska had from the beginning a reserve position. But now we're missing this positive message because of the internal problems of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And now we constantly need some new energy who would balance the relationship inside of the country. Because we cannot respond with one message because of these two entities. We have to find a way how to speak with one voice towards the international community to cover economics, to cover a financial situation, to cover agriculture, politics inside of the countries. We have to have partners inside of the political framework who would, on a structural reform basis, move forward that we can address these issues who pop out on our way forward. And for this point, the conclusion would be why such huge talents from this region in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia and Serbia, not only through sports, movie, culture, but they can only flourish and be successful when they are in a system that allows them to be efficient, to be benefiting from their skills. We are the only country who cannot benefit from all of the potentials we have. So one of my messages is let's stop these constantly confrontations inside of the country. But to stop this, we need a strategic support from outside. And I want to thank the speakers. We don't need somebody to work for us from the outside. We have the concepts how to solve the situations. But you cannot block a country just because on a constitutional question like Sjedis Fincic. You have to let us through the life so that we are on the way solving these issues.
And I already have seen the first question should come from Ambassador Beecroft. He was the head of the OSCE mission in 2000.
2001 to 2000.
Oh, could you press the speak here on the, okay.
Actually, I served twice in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was the special envoy for the Bosnian Federation in 1996-97 and ran what was called the Federation Forum. Martin will remember this well. This was Richard Holbrooke's idea of sort of forcibly bringing the two parties together, and we know the kind of success that that can have over the long term in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which means not much. Just a word about landmines first. When I was principal deputy for political military affairs at the State Department, we began looking at the landmine problem in Beihai. The problem is really bigger because so many of those landmines were not put in by professional military officers or men, and they were put in by a farmer somewhere because he was able to go into a weapons depot and get a landmine to discourage others from coming back. Those mines are now moving, and no one knows where, and no one knows how. And this will be a problem all the way to Romania as they come up against dams and bridges. So the problem is even bigger than Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and Croatia. It is a Southeastern Europe problem. At the risk of sounding Marxist, what is to be done? Every national group has produced a series of disappointing political figures. Martin, you are the exception. I think of another Croat friend of mine, Dubravko Lovrenović, who in a debate with me once on Bosnian television began by saying, "You must understand that I am not a professional Croat." Well, there are still too many professional Croats, professional Serbs, professional Bosniaks who unfortunately dominate the political scene in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You put your finger on the main problems, the imbalance between narodi and ljudi. Individual rights should take primacy while respecting the importance of group rights. Dayton put it backwards. The second is the need for a new political generation. I worked very hard on what we call the Successor Generation Initiative, but we never had the funds to do it as thoroughly as I would have wanted. And I remember too many young politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina complaining that their bosses wanted them to do nothing but get coffee. A catharsis, as you say, is needed. But what does that consist of? It consists of a vision. It consists of a plan that is acceptable to all. And the international community, which, by the way, is not really a community, won't do it for you. I think that what has to happen is that the political constellation has to be redefined by programs first, and ethnicity second. Ethnicity won't go away, but when it dominates everything else, you're left with nothing, as we have now seen because of the floods. Now, sabotage is inevitable. There will be attempts, if a plan comes forward, to torpedo it. And that is where the international community needs to pay attention and needs to be ready to intervene as necessary. So my plea to you, Martin, is to provoke us. Come to us with a joint plan. Don't call it Dayton 2. Call it Beihai 1. Otherwise, I fear that the drift will continue because we are preoccupied with other things now. You may have heard of a place called Ukraine, or Syria, or even China and Vietnam. Right now, Bosnia and Herzegovina seems to be the dog that is not barking. I think that could change, and it concerns me. If you can transform us from being passive to active by being active yourselves, that kind of leadership will get a response. But provoke us. It's essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Beecroft. Next, we have two more. I have to give a chance for my husband, Bill Stubner, to ask a question next, and then after that, Obrat Kesic. Okay, and the lady over there.
Actually, Obrad was going to yield the floor to me since he figured you wouldn't let me talk. But anyway, great presentations. Ambassador Beecroft, great intervention. Question for Martin. I work sometimes, I have a lot of friends at the Youth Initiative for Human Rights. And we've heard for years from one American ambassador after another that there are really good young people in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Well, we know that. But it seems like the way the main political parties are structured, they're so calcified at the top, quite frankly, with corruption, that idealistic young people have no way to move up. So now I've heard from my friends at Youth Initiative for Human Rights that your daughter in Mostar is really quite an activist. So tell me, how can you promote youth activism among all the groups so that they start to see that their interests are more with each other than with their so-called leaders?
Very good question. Thank you. Martin?
First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Beecroft. You really remembered on some really important points. First, the mediation in the Federation and the Federation for a really positive approach, and this is something we need today. And there, the United States played a key role, and I still believe that they can play such a role. Last year, we had a reform. A proposal of reform of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which should continue, which is mean to have one vote is really, which one thing I can agree with you. We have to come with one approach to ask and request some partners. But I also mentioned these unlogicalities which exist in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which stopping us from speaking as one voice towards the international community. In front of me, I have the statement to say I was also one of the persons who put this agenda forward, this declaration. This is the declaration of political parties inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, close to the European People's Party, where the first time we put a signature on 4 values we all share together: a European way and identity of equal rights, solidarity, respecting each other, economical government, and 5 of the strongest political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina signed this declaration, from the Bosniaks, the Serbians, and the Croats. This is the first step. Now we will see, is behind this signature really leaders pushing forward, or they're just playing with their hands in their pockets? But we're started. I would like to see also on the left center that there are some combining with mutual values, so that we can finally, after October, with not losing 1 year, 1.5 years before we reform the government. If you see, like, we're missing 1.5 years to forming our government. Why? Because the problem was which position would be held by which political party. This is the reason why we need to have a concept before the elections, so that we can move forward to fasten the whole process. But for this to happen, it's really important that one thing Mr. Stubner asked. Political party has to go through this process of internal profiling and the catharsis inside of the political parties. You see, I'm elected on the last General Assembly in Sarajevo, where we had 2 candidates. That was the first time, not only in Croatian nationalities, but in the whole Bosnia and Herzegovina, that we had open elections and that we were pushing forward democracy and that we have a positive approach toward the present. And we're paying a political price for having this positive approach, but we have to fight for it and not keep the current situation of status quo, which is mostly common by the other political parties. When this democracy inside the first of the political parties goes through this democratization and cartazism, then we can expect that it will move forward toward the whole country, and then we can talk about employment and everything else, and in this way use our economical power we have inside of the country. And then you have not the institutions, the governments, which should have the power, because all of the powers they had was sucked out by the groups, interest groups, which are affecting with them through political parties on a not transparent way. But as I mentioned, everybody has to start from itself. I can publicly say we passed through this process of catharsis as the first political party inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we are moving forward to the election with a positive campaign, with a positive approach. But there's no question about the path for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We see only Bosnia and Herzegovina on the path of the European Union and NATO. Without this is one thing we cannot discuss. This is one thing we're pushing forward, and this is a process we appreciate, and we want to have this process of negotiating towards the European Union and NATO. We don't need discounts with the reforms we need to have, but we need technical support to push it forward. The international community and the general audience has to detect which political parties are moving forward with this agenda for positive change, and then you have to put a positive pressure to change the current situation.
Thank you. Mr. Kestić and then the lady.
Thank you. Obred Kesic, Director of the Republika Srpska office here in Washington, D.C. Welcome for I don't know how many times you've been here to Washington, but welcome again. Two questions. First is something you didn't talk about, either one of you, and I'm kind of curious if you could give us your take on it, the effect of the EU elections, and how does that affect what you discussed in terms of the possibility of the EU or the U.S. assuming a greater role in Bosnia. And then the second question is, and I hate to be the dark cloud in this, although there are a lot of dark clouds here. What if Plan A doesn't work? What if the U.S. and Ambassador Beecroft touched on this? Is there a Plan B that you're looking for, are preparing? What if the U.S. and the EU don't engage more, don't become more active? What will you do?
Easy question. Thank you.
From the point of the European elections, from the point of Croatian Democratic Union in Croatia, they had a really positive results. They're currently opposition side of Croatia, and we have to use this current situation. With getting 6 minutes inside of the European Parliament. A few months ago I had a presentation in the European Union where on the topic, where's the Western Balkan after 10 years after the Solon Summit and the enlargement process on the Balkan. I can give you the speech, and it's publicly, you can get it on the public website. First, there was a changement inside of the European Parliament because the EPP is not so dominating as they were. So most likely they have to go towards a big coalition with the Social Democrats and the European People Party. But the problems with us, we don't open this Plan B for positive change. And the Plan B would be not to question any entities, but to see what is the problem inside of the country. The problem is when the Croatians are questions, we cannot push things under the carpet because in two voting process, the results were pushed forward to the Croatian people, meaning they didn't respect their voting wall. We don't ask for anything else. We're just asking respect the will of the Croatian people and don't manipulate with other votes to put their government officials for them. This is the first question we have to address as beginners. And the plan B would be to open, parallel with political agreements, what is the interest of Republika Srpska. The most important thing for Republika Srpska is that the institutions inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina function, because Republika Srpska has full control about these institutions, also in the presidency, also in the ministry and everything. But the Croatian doesn't have such a situation. But we don't have any situation that we can affect it. But even the Croats are saying we need to have this institution who can work on the problems. So the most important thing for Republika Srpska has that we have functioning institutions inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Plan B is that we have to move forward on together on a plan, political plan, how to solve the problems. And this is a point we have to move forward. If we see how much China is investing inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, a few millions dollars, so it shows all of the potential we have inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially when we speak about electricity and natural resources. And we are missing the investment from the other side, from the United States and everything else. So meaning the plan B would be not to push the responsibilities to somebody else or ask about the referendum to divide the country, but to move forward in the concept to fight for better living conditions inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to address this biblical message of what happened currently in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have currently 4,000 places where the earth is moving. We're not knowing where the mines are. Currently, we have 2,000 places where the land was moving, and the country is divided. We're not knowing what will happen in the future. What will happen when we have next time such a natural catastrophe? A few days I read on Facebook, one madam from Croatia mentioned the speech of John Paul II when he was in Sarajevo. This was such a brilliant speech, and I would ask you all to read it. He said, where the Sava is coming out from Slovenia, ending in Dunav, in Serbia, how much we have to rely on each other. And we see this only now after this elementary natural catastrophe. But we have to respond to these questions, not to manipulate with the entity questions or the nationality question, so that everybody feels recognized and appreciated inside of the country. And that is a really important point. Plan B is to move forward towards Europe, towards NATO, and to move away from this current instability which is existing.
If I could
Comment on
just
this, yes.
jump in, Obrab, two very fair questions. Plan B, I think we know what is Plan B. Plan B is what you see is what you get. And it's to let the country continue and roll the dice till the next disaster comes, and let's hope it isn't of a interethnic character. So that to me, and that seems to be the default position. A lot of rhetoric and so forth, but very little action. To your point, your question about the EU elections, and to come back to Bob's also very good points. Just I try to list these very fast. Number one is whatever these results, election results, you know, the Front National in France and so on and so forth, the Balkans have seemed to be inured from these changes. Far more serious than these election victories was the financial crisis in Europe. Greece, the leading state in the most powerful economy in the Balkan region, devastated. And it had almost no effect on the attraction and the direction of countries in the region, most notably, of course, Obrat, as you know, Serbia, whose deal that it cut, a very historic deal with Kosovo, was only because of its attraction to the EU. So that, I think it's good that you raised it, but the Balkans have crossed far more serious troubled waters with, in terms of the recent financial crisis than this very distressing results, but still, it seems that the magnet is there, and it's a very important magnet, and this goes to Bob's point. But I would just remember in our bleak scenario here that there is a vision. You're right, there has to be a vision, but there is a vision. And the vision is the EU, if not NATO as well, not necessarily, but the EU accession. And it's a good vision. It's not a perfect vision, but it's not a bad vision at all. And it has had substantial impact. Croatia has seen, I think you can really point to tangible progress in Croatia. You can also see, Hungary, et cetera, slippage and so forth. It's not a panacea. But given what's available in the world and the amount of energy, it's a really, really good vision. Imagine if Egypt had such a vision, a country like that. They have nowhere. They don't know where they're going to go, and so they're left in just to fight amongst each other and battle it out and choose a dictator. Bosnia has a place. It has a point of strategic orientation. We want to be like that. Croatia has proven you can get there, and so that is the vision. The problem is it doesn't work. It doesn't work with a dam, the EU accession process. And that's where the energy, I think there's been some good ideas on this, that's where the energy has to be, in the imagination. We have the vehicle, but we have to tailor it and make it work for this country, to make it work in a way that Bosnia can approach that. And I had a couple other things. I'll wait, Renata.
Thank you, Ed. We are approaching our end time, so we have three more persons that I've spotted. One is the lady on my left. If you could just make it short, and then gentleman here and the lady.
Hvala. Ja sam jedna od 50...
I'm one member of the 50%. My name is Vesna Markovic, and I'm working for UNDP in New York in the Bureau of Crisis Prevention. I would use my right to speak to one of our languages because I'm a member of the 50% of Bosnia and Herzegovina citizens who have to leave their country. First, only short comment on the introductions, how they started this conference. I would seriously want to point out that solidarity which was shown now during these floods and after the floods, and it's still shown, is not something that really surprised us, but it gave a positive message, and we're really positively happy about it. That how the nations on the Balkans have to respect each other and give a hand in tough situations. I've seen it also on the television, but also in the people from the Balkans who are not living on the Balkan, where the communities were supporting each other, not seeing who they giving the money, not meaning the Bosniak Serbians. So the reason why I'm working for the United Nations, the question is going to be a little bit different. My question would be how the United Nations should give their contribution towards a better situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have in December put Bosnia and Herzegovina back on the list as one of the priorities. Because of the analysis we made, we put Bosnia and Herzegovina as one of the priorities, at the same level as Mali, Syria, Kosovo, or some other countries. In March, I had the opportunity to visit the country and also talk with Mr. Latal, which you mentioned today. And we wanted, in some kind of way, suggest some program in this time period when you know that we in the region of Balkans constantly making jokes about that situation is really crisis, but we can live with it. So we're looking at the elections and everything else, but the stage currently is really critical, and we all, especially in the bureau where I'm working, is extremely important to hear from your point of view, Mr. Raguš, and just like the ambassador said, how you can provoke our response, what we can do in this moment, which is really critical, in a positive way, this crisis to move the process away, what we could do.
We are really running short. I would like to take 2 more questions. Could you introduce yourself?
I'm Zvonko Labas. I work with National Federation of Croatian Americans. For years, we have been representing Croatian American community here in Washington, D.C. We fought for many causes for Croatians all over the world, in the United States, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Every time we came to talk to people in the State Department to say mea culpa, every time we ask what can be done to help Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatian Bosnia-Herzegovina, Herzegovina is a feasible, Bosnia-Herzegovina is a feasible state, etc., etc. Every time we were told it's their business, they have to do it. We don't get involved. Don't touch the Dayton Agreement. It was a holy grail, over and over again. So my question now is, what, especially to Mr. Joseph, is the State Department on our side and the European Union, are they finally willing to become, as Mr. Raguš was saying, active partners with Bosnia and Herzegovina to finally help them develop and implement the Constitution and other things that they need to become a feasible state and country?
Thank you, Mr. Labas. And the last question.
My name is Regina Campa. I work from Seidel. Seidel was the company that provided the technology to the election management system that was used in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the 2010 elections. The elections are just 4 months away, and it's quite tight already, and you had a major natural disaster. I was wondering do you see that need of international assistance somehow to be there for the elections, or we should feel comfortable having, the central election body running the elections by themselves? Or this is one of the things that you would like the U.S. to support?
Thank you very much. Mr. Raguš.
Thank you. How the United Nations could help? Meaning when the war started in 1992, I was in Sarajevo. I was the youngest minister in the government, and with UNHC, we established the air bridge, which was lasting long for a few years. And with the notes of the analytics, was that all of the users was mostly getting. The humanitarian, only 11% was maybe lost. My message was, just like then, the humanitarian help is really necessary. Now when I was going to the States, I was spoken with all mayors in Bosnia. Few councils are still flooded, and the question is when they will start a normal life again. Meaning schools, daycare, hospitals, they are priorities. And the second point is that housing funds need to be supported so that the people have somewhere to live because they lost everything these floods. And these are the key messages. How on an economical way, on a sustainable way, support, because the losses in these areas are really high. you by yourself said that you're acting preventing. Now is the moment for a really global role of UN on a humanitarian level. From the point of Mr. Labas, I think he really touched the heart of the problem. I open it in my opening speech. I call this the Europeanization of Dayton. And on this Europeanization, we need all of the men who established Dayton to push forward, to work on it. And there's no taboo team in these questions. Dayton needs an evaluation without questioning anybody inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, because currently it's limiting the country. It's a system which is not functioning in these crisis situations and not even question anything else. And even the Croats, as a constitutional nationals, have to be feeling as a constitutional entity to having the rights. And all of the people, all of the citizens have to feel equal. That is an imperative we have to put forward. When we ask what is going through with the election, before coming here, we're pointing our applications towards the voting, meaning as a political party, to have the right to compete. You know what response we get from the Central Commission for the elections? That the Board of Ministers didn't get the money to have opening voting cells, meaning open boxes where you can look inside. So even if we would just have these boxes where you can see it from the outside, meaning being visible, would be a bit step forward. There are some political parties who don't have the power to control the voting body, how it's used mostly in the Balkans. The second, that we stop with the voting bills who are not counted because they're not efficient or seen as representative, that we have quality preservers and a system of counting the bills which is on a European level from the quality sides. If you could support in any way on this level, we can change the number and on an institutional way move forward the central elected body in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because OSCE was supporting a lot. And even now, the impact of OSCE is still of important strategic level. No matter that we have currently a body who is independent and can move forward with the elections. But this kind of support would be really fantastic, that we can have a much more transparent election process, so we would respect the right of every individual, their right to vote. I will give you all of the address, and I really appreciate your offer.
Mr. Labash, thank you for asking that question. You put your finger right on it. I mean, will the U.S. government take this question seriously? Bill is shaking his head. I wouldn't write it off, but I think a lot of it depends on us and how what folks like who come to meetings like this are obviously interested and committed to Bosnia, and especially in the aftermath of this flood. There's an opportunity. So I would encourage people to get the message out that this is a country that needs our help. There's a couple of problems, though, of getting there. And one, we come back on your point, that the message, they have to do it, the Dayton Agreement and so forth. We heard Martin, again, with his eloquent point about logic. Yeah, that's very logical in a logical system. And there's been too much of that temptation. It's just so easy, especially for someone who doesn't really want to deal with the problem. They have to do it. It just sounds nice, and it's divorced from reality. One of the specific examples of that, of course, was in these recent protests that were in February, and we wasted that opportunity because people said, we have to, look, they're speaking. The people of Bosnia are speaking, so who are we to jump in and tell them? And when you scratch right down, well, first of all, it wasn't all the people of Bosnia. It was in one mainly in one geographical area. There might have been sympathy, and there appears to be sympathy with the protests everywhere, but only one group was really speaking about it, number one. Number two, there were some good things that were being done, and there were also a lot of crackpot ideas. So there was great stuff about holding cantonal officials responsible for corruption and getting rid of their Bieli Kruh, Bieli Chleb that they had, and get rid of that. That was great. But these plenums did not address the fundamental problems that keep this country mired. They did not. To the contrary, some people were promoting these fringe ideas, citizens' democracy, we don't need institutions, and so forth. And then you see a flood. I'm sorry. People, it's great, all this volunteer work is great, but that isn't what saves people. You need a flood, a natural disaster like that is the proof. You need functioning institutions, and there is no alternative to representative government. However badly it functions, however much Churchill was right in what he said, it's democracy is the worst of all systems except for all the others. And there is no one, and hopefully people in that protest movement who were so big on crazy ideas like that will understand and will become active in the elections. I'm going to finish with two concrete suggestions that are feasible, that can be done, so that this isn't just, oh, well, gee, pie in the sky, I'll do something, and so forth, but what actually can be done. I'm going to give two very specific, very feasible things that can be done. Number one is with respect to the relief that's coming in. This is one that I'm going to credit Renata with, I think along the same lines, but this may have come up in our discussion. But you don't want to work around all the country's institutions, and you don't want to deny the people the relief. But the institutions, state and cantonal, are not functioning and highly corrupt. Go to the municipality. Go to the local level. So that's one very concrete, feasible suggestion that can be done with respect, empower the local level, and that's keeping very much with the EU philosophy of subsidiarity. And that's, again, you can distinguish and measure municipalities that don't perform, obviously, and don't cooperate, you don't get the money. Then the other one is in addition to try to, revamp the Constitution and change the EU accession system, which is the real key there, but while we're waiting for that, there's something that could be done. There's an initiative that could be done, and that's on privatization. These again, we see the floods were the example. The corruption is not just a theoretical issue. It's a real problem that has contributed to the devastation that this country experiences. Let's do something about that. Come forward, international, EU, US, joint proposal to privatize these socially owned enterprises that the political parties exploit to remain in power. That is feasible. That is not any grandiose thing. That can be done. And imagine you put that out as a public offer with, there's any number of ways it could be done with OHR, it could be done with the EU, it could be done with the US, offering to supervise, so make sure that privatization is done in a transparent way. You put that out publicly, you show me that Bosnian citizen who is not going to support that. I would like to see that aside from someone who is elected leader or benefiting from the patronage system. So those are two very specific things that could be done. Renata, I want to thank you very much, and I just want to say the future of this country, we should not lose hope with people like Martin who are around.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, everybody. I hope you have informative and enjoyable afternoon, and I hope you will take some ideas and lessons. And Martin has a meeting at 4, but he'll be here to chat with you and maybe exchange cards if you have. Thank you, and see you soon.